8:14 a.m., the Persian Gulf, 91 nautical miles northeast of Bahrain. USS Mason, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer leading a 3-ship task group, detected 27 Iranian armed drones crossing the coast bearing down directly on the formation. 27, not 12, not 16, 27. The task group's combined ESSM inventory, 44 missiles. 27 targets, 44 missiles, a miss rate that would not be zero. 2 FA-18S were already airborne. They would reach the drones in 6 minutes. The drones would reach the ships in 7. Welcome to Navy Beacon, where we break down the operations that define sea power. Before we talk about the numbers, we need to talk about why the IRGC sent 27 drones instead of the 15 or 16 that previous engagements had seen. Because the answer to that question is not simply more is better. It is a specific tactical response to something the IRGC had learned from watching U.S. Navy air defense engagements over the preceding 18 months. In every previous drone attack on U.S. naval forces in the Gulf, the defending ships had used their ESSM inventory to achieve intercept rates between 62 and 71%, with Phalanx CYWS providing terminal defense against leakers. In no previous engagement had the attacking drone package been large enough to mathematically exceed the defending ship's ESSM capacity at realistic miss rates. The IRGC had done the math. They had calculated that a package of between 25 and 30 drones against a standard 3-ship task group, a destroyer lead with 2 smaller escorts, or a second destroyer and a support ship, would push the expected number of missiles required to defeat all threats above the formation's combined inventory, even at the lower end of historical miss rates. 27 drones against 44 ESSMs at a 30% miss rate required approximately 39 missiles for high-confidence intercept. That left 5 missiles of margin. At a 35% miss rate, which the previous engagement with evasion-programmed Shaheds had demonstrated was achievable against modified flight profiles, the required intercept count rose to 42. 2 missiles of margin. At 40% miss rate, the formation ran out of ESSMs before the last drone was engaged. The 27 drones were not a round number chosen arbitrarily. They were chosen specifically because they pushed the math to the edge of the formation's capacity. The task group consisted of USS Mason as the lead destroyer, USS Donald Cook as a second destroyer 800 meters to port, and USNS Leroy Grumman, a Henry J. Kaiser-class replenishment oiler, 1,200 meters astern. Grumman was carrying 180,000 barrels of naval fuel oil and aviation fuel for the carrier strike group operating in the northern Gulf. The attack had been timed for 8:14 a.m. specifically because that was when a routine handoff in combat air patrol coverage created a gap. The 2 FA-18S assigned to cover the task group's transit had reached their fuel limit and turned for the carrier, while their replacements were still 6 minutes out from sector coverage. The IRGC drone operators had been monitoring the CAP pattern for 72 hours, using a network of coastal observation posts and commercially available aircraft tracking data. They had mapped the CAP cycle precisely. Relief aircraft launched from the carrier, flew the transit, arrived on station, and there was a window of between 4 and 9 minutes where neither the departing pair nor the arriving pair had eyes on coverage over the task group's position. The drones launched into that window. 27 drones timed to arrive at the task group during the CAP gap, with the replacement FA-18S 6 minutes away. 6 minutes. The drone's flight time to the task group, 7 minutes. The replacement CAP section, Cutlass 11 and Cutlass 12, had been already en route when the drone launch was detected. Their flight time to the drone formation was 6 minutes, 1 minute before the drones reached the ships. 1 minute. That 1 minute was the operational margin the IRGC had accepted in their planning. They had assessed that 1 minute of fighter intercept time against a 27 drone formation would not be sufficient to stop enough drones to protect the formation completely. They were almost right. USS Mason's AN/SPY-1D radar acquired the drone formation at 8:14:22 a.m., the moment the drones crossed the coast and came into radar coverage range. The automated classification was immediate: slow, small, multiple contacts, same altitude band, same approach bearing, flight profile consistent with Shahed 136 variants. The Tactical Action Officer, Lieutenant Commander Chen, was in CIC. She had been on watch since 7 a.m., and had been specifically briefed on the CAP gap timing before her watch began. One of her predecessors in the previous watch rotation had flagged the coverage window as a potential vulnerability in the daily intelligence note. She processed the contact picture in 8 seconds. 27 contacts, bearing north-northwest. Estimated range from formation at detection, 43 nautical miles. She called it at 8:14:30 a.m. All stations CIC, 27 drone contacts inbound, bearing 317, range 43 miles, general quarters. NavCent, 27 drones, CAP gap, request immediate air support. The general quarters alarm sounded at 8:14:32 a.m. She then did something that the after-action review would later highlight as a critical decision made under time pressure. She divided the fire control allocation problem between USS Mason and USS Donald Cook, creating 2 independent engagement sectors that divided the incoming formation into northern and southern halves, with each ship responsible for its assigned sector, rather than both ships attempting to manage the full 27 contacts. The deconfliction was not standard doctrine. It was a judgment call she made in the 40 seconds before the first ESSM engagements began. The logic: 2 ships trying to manage the same target picture against 27 contacts would generate duplicate engagements and coordination delays. 2 ships each managing 13 or 14 assigned contacts independently would be faster. She was right. It worked. Thurso. The ESSM engagement began at 8:15:44 a.m. when the lead drones entered the 40 nautical mile engagement boundary. USS Mason took the northern cluster, 14 contacts, and USS Donald Cook took the southern cluster of 13. USS Mason fired pairs, 2 ESSMs per target, prioritizing the lead contacts. The drones were not flying the evasion-programmed zigzag profile that had complicated previous engagements. This batch was flying straight in on their programmed routes, which was initially a relief for the ESSM crews, since straight-flying Shaheds have a higher intercept rate. But the reason this batch was flying straight became apparent when the first miss occurred at 8:16:12 a.m. The missed drone had not been programmed to evade. It had been programmed to fly at low altitude and maximum speed, a modified flight profile that sacrificed altitude variation for a steeper dive angle in the terminal phase, reducing the exposure time for the ESSM seeker in the final approach. The ESSM had been fired with a standard engagement solution. The missile detonated at the correct range. The drone was not there. It had been flying the steeper approach profile that put it slightly below the engagement altitude the fire control solution had assumed. Miss. A re-engagement was assigned immediately. The was still inbound. The re-engagement ESSM fired and hit, but that re-engagement used one more missile than planned for that target. By 8:18 a.m., 3.5 minutes into the engagement, the score across both ships was 17 Shaheds destroyed, 10 still inbound, combined ESSM inventory at 22 missiles remaining. 10 drones, 22 missiles. At 2 missiles per target with a miss requiring a third, the math was running to the edge. At 8:18:24 a.m., Cutlass 11 and Cutlass 12 arrived at the drone formation. 2 FA-18E Super Hornets, each carrying 4 AIM-120AM RAAM air-to-air missiles. 8 missiles total against 10 remaining drones. The AMRAAM is a fully active radar homing missile, faster and more capable than the ESSM against small aerial targets, but also limited in magazine. 8 AMRAMs against 10 drones meant that if every AMRAM hit, 2 drones still got through to the ship's phalanx. Cutlass 11 fired first, engaging the 4 closest drones on his radar picture, the ones that had the shortest remaining flight time to USS Mason. 4 AMRAM launches in rapid succession, 3 hits, 1 miss. The missed drone was at the edge of the AMRAM's engagement envelope, and the radar fuse triggered fractionally early. The drone passed through the fragmentation pattern and took hits, but continued flying, damaged. Cutlass 12 engaged the next 4 contacts, the middle of the drone column. 4 AMRAM launches, 4 hits. The fighters had now expended all 8 AMRAMs. 2 drones remained, the one that had survived the AMRAM hit, now flying damaged and erratic, and one that had not yet been engaged because the fighter's targeting queue had prioritized the closer threats. The damaged drone was 3.5 nautical miles from USS Mason, descending erratically, still flying, still aimed at the ship. The unengaged drone was 6 nautical miles out and closing steadily. USS Mason's phalanx mounts engaged both. The forward phalanx took the damaged drone. One burst 70 rounds at 1.5 nautical miles. Hit. The drone came apart. The aft phalanx engaged the unengaged drone at 2 nautical miles. Burst. Miss. The drone's approach bearing put it at the edge of the aft phalanx's coverage arc. The mount traversed maximum. The next burst landed. Partial hit. The drone pitched down. It impacted the water 31 meters from USS Mason's starboard side at 8:19:47 a.m. The 50-kilogram warhead detonated on water impact. The pressure pulse from the detonation reached USS Mason's hull in milliseconds. The shock was severe. A 50-kilogram warhead at 31 meters underwater is a meaningful event for a 9,500-ton destroyer. The shock caused the port main feed pump to trip its circuit breakers, reducing propulsion power temporarily. 7 sailors in the engineering spaces were shaken off their feet. 2 sustained minor injuries. The starboard hull plating showed no structural damage in the post-engagement survey. The feed pump circuit breakers were reset within 4 minutes. USS Mason remained fully operational. USNS Leroy Grumman, the oiler trailing the formation, was unharmed. All 27 drones had targeted the destroyer lead elements, rather than the more vulnerable, higher-value oiler. The targeting guidance had been preset by the IRGC planners before launch and could not be changed in flight. If the targeting had been assigned to the oiler, the outcome could have been significantly worse. The after-action review convened 6 days after the engagement and produced 5 findings. Finding 1 was the CAP gap exploitation. The IRGC had monitored U.S. carrier air wing CAP patterns for 72 hours using a combination of commercially available aircraft tracking tools, open-source data, and coastal observation posts, and had identified a specific window in the coverage rotation to exploit. The review recommended that the standard CAP relief cycle be modified to ensure an overlap period, the relieving aircraft arriving on station before the departing aircraft leaves, eliminating the gap. This required additional fuel planning and extended mission profiles for the relief aircraft, but was assessed as operationally necessary. Finding 2 was the 27 drone targeting math. The IRGC had deliberately sized their drone package to push the formation's ESSM inventory to the edge. The review assessed that the IRGC had access to sufficient intelligence about U.S. Navy ESSM loadouts and historical miss rates to make this calculation. The specific source of that intelligence was not identified in the unclassified review findings. The recommendation: vary ESSM loadout quantities between deployments to prevent adversary intelligence from building accurate capacity models. Finding 3 was Lieutenant Commander Chen's sector deconfliction decision. Her improvised division of the engagement between USS Mason and USS Donald Cook had demonstrably reduced coordination delays and improved the engagement rate during the critical first 3 minutes. The review recommended formalizing the sector deconfliction approach as a standing procedure for multi-ship formations facing large drone swarms, with pre-planned sector assignments built into formation doctrine rather than requiring a real-time improvisation. Finding 4 was the modified low-altitude profile, Shaheds. The steep approach variant, trading altitude variation for a faster terminal dive, had caused the first miss in the engagement and forced a re-engagement that consumed an extra ESSM. The low-altitude dive profile was logged as a new Shahed variant in the threat library, and an updated ESSM engagement solution, accounting for a steeper terminal dive angle, was developed and distributed to fleet ships within 3 weeks. Finding 5 was strategic. The IRGC had successfully executed a complex, time-coordinated formation-level drone attack, optimized around specific U.S. Navy tactical parameters. They had identified the CAP gap, sized the drone package to the edge of ESSM capacity, used a modified flight profile to degrade intercept rates, and timed the attack to arrive during the CAP gap. Every element had been deliberately planned. The detonation 31 meters from USS Mason's hull had been the outcome after 27 drones were engaged by 44 ESSMs, 8 AMRAAMs, and 2 phalanx mounts. It was not luck. It was a system performing at the absolute limit of its designed capability against a threat that had been carefully engineered to reach that limit. The formation was operational. The oiler was safe. The fuel reached the carrier, but the margin had been 31 meters, and the IRGC had fired 27 drones. Next time, they might send 32. Stay vigilant, stay informed. This is Navy Beacon, and we'll see you in the next one.